Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We are mid-June 2024. How is your year going? Summer kicking off? This is probably going to be a short, discombobulated episode. Jen and I were scheduled to record. She is not feeling well, and we had a little chat before we disconnected. And I want to talk a little bit about what we were talking about. It still has to do with kind of this concept about relationships, attachment injuries, sort of. But I had some insights as I was working with my coach and a new way of looking at when you have a friendship with someone. This is very common with neurodivergent folks, so I'm thinking that this will be relatable. If you have a friendship with someone and then that person gets into a relationship, through the views of monogamy, how that relationship shifts. And I want to talk about that today and some things that became clear to me, or clearer when I was talking with my coach yesterday. And because after talking to my mom and then thinking that things with Jen would ease up, and then I still have these attachment injuries that are coming up, I kept thinking, like, what is wrong? Like, I'm working so friggin' hard, and how come I still get activated? And I got some more information when I spoke with my coach yesterday. She was out. I think we didn't meet for 2 weeks, and we meet every week. So I just want to share some of this stuff. I am a little bit concerned that I have some blended parts, and I suspect that you're going to hear them in this episode, and then I'm going to regret having shared my blended parts. But let's just trust and see where it's going to go. So let's talk first about this idea of monogamy and platonic partnerships. So we, in our monogamistic society, the way that we typically view, if like Jen and I are friends, and then if Jen has a partner, which she does right now, then that relationship supersedes my friendship with her. And that is her primary relationship, and our friendship becomes a secondary relationship. What I've been talking about recently is, and so I'm naming this so that we can kind of separate these two things. With my trauma with my mom, I would be her primary relationship. She would date someone. My relationship with my mom became her secondary relationship, and her primary relationship would be with whoever she was dating. And then when she wasn't dating, I would move back up into that primary relationship. I think we need to look at that through the trauma lens, and that is my story with my trauma. But for the sake of this conversation, I want to set that paradigm aside. And we're not talking now about trauma. We're not talking about what happened with my mom. We're talking about a whole new paradigm. So in this paradigm of monogamy, a primary relationship will supersede any friendship. If we look at the concept of either a platonic partnership or a platonic life partner, if you're neurodivergent, these are non-romantic, non-sexual relationships, but they're primary relationships. You're a platonic partnership or a platonic life partner. When I was talking to my coach, or when my coach was talking to me and shared this with me, the way that these relationships work is then if there is a primary relationship, so Jen has a primary relationship right now, not with me, that under a polyamorous framework, that my relationship with Jen would be on equal footing as her relationship, that the relationship that Jen and I have is a partnership or a life partnership. We haven't talked about what that's going to look like. I just talked to her briefly about this before I started recording, so we need to do more exploration. Then that relationship is at the same, I don't have, for lack of better language, is at the same level as her primary partnership. What this means to me, let me sidestep for a minute. Permanence in relationships, if you're neurodivergent, can be really challenging, and it is very challenging for me. And object permanence is kind of out of sight, out of mind. It's very hard to tease out what is trauma, what is permanence. But if we just look at permanence, oftentimes, and tell me if this relates to you or resonates for you, that you don't talk to a friend, see a friend, it doesn't occur to you to reach out and connect. But then when you get together with them, it feels like there hasn't been a minute since you've been together, since you haven't been together, that you just pick up where you are. I know for me that I have a really hard time remembering that I belong, that I fit in, that I'm connected. And I often am resistant to returning to activities or doing group things. And then I do, and I forget how much I love it. And probably the most concrete example that I can think of is oftentimes, since I paddle regularly and my husband will help me get the boat from where we store it and get it on the car, it's not uncommon for him to ask, like, are you excited about paddling? And generally my answer is no. I have a very hard time transitioning from one activity to another. So I'm doing something in the house and I have to stop because now we have to get the boat on the car and I have to get everything ready. So those transitions are hard for me. I generally am low energy. And so it doesn't really feel like it's a fun thing to paddle, but I just know to just acknowledge that this is kind of what my state is. Once I get to the bay and I unload my boat and I get on the water, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I have a great time. It's satisfying, it's fulfilling, and I come back and I'm happy and fulfilled and I'm really glad that I went. But it is not common for me to get very excited before an activity because it's hard to transition. It's hard for me to think about what it's going to be like. And I forget that I'm connected and I belong. That's just how I am. And part of that is about permanence. I also tend to forget the impact that I have. And I'll just share a story with you. So my son Daniel graduated from college and we went up to where he lives for the graduation. And his girlfriend's parents were there and her brother, they all lived together, but her parents came to the graduation also. And as I'm unmasking, I don't do a lot of work around making social communication. I am very good at asking lots of questions and being very engaging and asking about things that aren't really of interest to me. But I mean, I wouldn't say that out loud, but that's what the truth is. I'm very good at it. And the reality is it exhausts me and it will take a toll on me. And I'm just not willing to do it anymore. And so I'm a lot more quiet when we have these social gatherings. And I just kind of observed myself in this. We were all together before, during, and after the graduation. I just observed myself not engaging quite as much. I did share on the way back from the graduation. Oh, I don't think y'all know. I paddled on Sunday and we heard that there was a whale that was in the channel that goes from the bay out to the ocean. So we paddled out, we were heading to the channel, and before we even got to the channel, we saw a whale, and it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my entire life. I got some great video. If you are in the Unapologetically Sensitive Facebook group, I posted, 4 or 5 videos. If you follow me on Instagram at Unapologetically Sensitive, I posted one of the videos. Just an amazing, amazing, amazing thing. So I did share that as we were leaving the graduation and going to pick up food to bring back to the house. I did share about that and I showed the video that I had and was very excited. The girlfriend's parents are taking a trip. I had asked, how long they were going to be gone. I asked a few questions, but I really did not overwork the whole thing. Last night, I was talking on the phone to Daniel's girlfriend and we were reflecting about the graduation and how things went. And I said, I have this concern. She knows I'm autistic. I have this concern that it looks like I don't engage and that I'm standoffish and that I'm not really interested in communicating. And there is some truth to that there are very few things that I'm interested in. If I have a relationship with you and I care about you, I'm fascinated with every aspect of your life and what you're doing. It's meaningful to me because I care and it's familiar. But if I don't know you and you're engaged in lots of things that I'm not familiar with, sometimes I'm very curious. But for the most part, if it doesn't interest me, I'm just not expending the energy that I used to. And she's so sweet. She's like, you don't even come off that way at all. And she could tell that I did engage and I was interacting on some level. And she just knows who I am and knows my heart. And what I love is, and both of the girlfriends have said this, that my emotional availability and my ability to connect emotionally is very strong. And that's really significant to the girlfriends. So it just felt really affirming. But in my mind, I'm thinking that they see me as unsocial, standoffish, not engaged. And that was not at all how the girlfriends saw me. So this kind of goes back to that concept that I was talking to you about, permanence. It's a little bit of a diversion, but how we perceive ourselves in relationships, how we think that other people perceive us. I hear an awful lot from autistics about how much they struggle. I don't know if I should say you or they. I'm going to say they. They struggle with relationships and friendships and being misunderstood and having their intentions be misunderstood, and their directness as being rude, or they're asking questions to get clarification is seen as being confrontive. So I really recognize this. But this idea of permanence and how we are perceived, I think it's just a big thing. So I know I kind of went on a little bit diversion. I'm going to try and pull us back to this. So if you look at this concept of polyamory with a primary relationship and with a friendship, it really resonated with me when my coach said this. And when Jen and I were talking, I was thinking about my relationship with my husband and my relationship with Jen, and they feel like they're equal relationships. And when Steve and I are out, if Jen needs me, I'm available because I care and she's a part of my life and I want to be available. And when we were driving up to the graduation earlier this week, Jen had FaceTimed me and I wanted to be available to her. And I said, I want you to know that there's a place here, even if I'm busy and doing other things, I want there to be a place for you. This is where you may hear some of my my parts that are a little bit blended. And this is still a work in progress. What has happened on some of the trips that Jen has gone away for the weekend or 3 or 4 days with her partner, and with this lens of monogamy, that her primary relationship trumps my relationship with her, we often would not have communication when she would go away. I also get this is a new relationship energy. You want to have that time with your partner. I understand that. And what we had talked about prior to this new concept of polyamory or monogamy in a friendship, I had said, I need to have more understanding when you go away of what are the expectations around our relationship, because the ambiguity is really hard for me. And I don't understand. We have these patterns of communication that are regular, and then she goes away and that changes. And part of what my coach and I discussed, what my coach shared with me that makes sense, is I count on these patterns of communication. And when they change and we haven't talked about it, that change in the pattern, that activates my attachment wounds. Because I just kept thinking, how come I keep getting triggered? I've talked to my mom, I've talked with Jen, I'm doing all this work, and I still keep getting triggered. What is wrong with me? But part of it is that we haven't defined what happens, what Jen and I do in our relationship when there are these shifts and changes. And an example is Jen hasn't been feeling well. And yesterday, I'm trying to think of the order of things. I may have left her a polo in the morning and didn't hear from her all day, or maybe she left me one in the morning and I left one back. And then mid-afternoon, we hadn't talked, which isn't unusual, but I reached out and said, I don't know if you're needing space. I don't know if you're cocooning. I don't know. I'm here for you. Is there anything going on? And I didn't hear from her for a couple of hours. And while I was able to maintain, it took a lot for me to not sink and to have to constantly use my tools. And then we went out to dinner to celebrate Daniel last night. And so I texted her on our way out to dinner and just said, hey, should I be concerned about you? Is everything okay between us? And then she responded and said she was cocooning and she'd forgotten to respond to my polo. So while I didn't get fully activated, I had to do a lot of work throughout the day, because this is a change in our communication pattern. I'm not saying it's good or bad or that anybody did anything right or wrong. What I'm doing is naming what happens is that when there's a change or a gap and there's not a response or an acknowledgement, that impacts me. And Jen and I have emojis that we send each other that just mean I love you, is everything okay? And when I sent the second text or the first one, I put the emojis in there and she didn't respond with that. So again, that's a shift in communication. And the good news is I didn't get fully activated, but it took a lot of energy on my part. So part of what Jen and I are talking about is trying to figure out, how do we define what happens in the relationship, and where this is the part where the parts are blended. I know you're like, well, where are the blended parts? That coming up, we're going to be gone for a week when we go to Josh's graduation from boot camp. At the same time, Jen's partner is not going to be available for a few days and probably will not have cell service. And when Jen and I were talking about it, the part of me that feels wounded is Jen's gone away 3 times now, and we've had minimal contact. And that's been challenging for me. And my wounded part feels like there's no room for me. You go away and our relationship ceases to exist and there's no room for me. We've always had this understanding that if you need me, if there's an emergency, I'm here for you. But I contend that I don't want there to be an emergency and I don't want to have to be in crisis to connect. If we have a pattern of connection and we need space, like I understand that. And sometimes you're engaged in things and there just isn't time or the opportunity to connect. I understand that. But I don't want to have to decide if I'm in crisis, and I don't want to have to be in crisis in order to have a connection. That just doesn't work for me. And I've communicated this to Jen. So the part of me that feels blended is when I'm going away, there's a part of me that feels like, well, if we're just having a friendship and your partnership is above our friendship, and so when you go away, your priority is to be with your partner and our friendship waits unless I'm in crisis, I'm going away for a week. And your partner's going to be gone. And if you don't have room for me when you go away, I don't know that I want to have room for you when I go away. This is my wounded part. And I feel like I want Jen to have this feeling of what it's like to kind of be, these are my words, like left behind, that there's not room for you when I go away, that our relationship is static only when I'm in my hometown and I have time for you. But if other things are going on with other people, then there's not room for you. I'm being a little messy with my language. These are some of my disempowered parts. I totally own that. And when Steve and I were driving to Daniel's graduation and Jen wasn't feeling well, I know I'm repeating myself. I told Jen, like, I want you to know that there is always room for you, that is my value. And when my coach and I talked about this concept under polyamory of having a platonic partnership or a platonic life partner, that fits with my value system. That there will always be a space for you no matter where I'm at, because you are a primary relationship for me. And just because I'm busy doing things, I will always make time for you, not you being in crisis and not having an emergency, but I will bring you with me and there is a space for you. And these are what my values are. Now, when Jen and I talked today, she was intrigued. Obviously she needs time to process. And this is a new relationship, a new primary relationship that she has. And they're still getting to know each other and figuring out what their patterns of communication are. So I recognize all of that. But I can tell you that Jen has been a part of my relationship with Steve. And when we go places and do things, I always bring Jen with me and I polar her and show her where I'm at. And Steve and I are in the car and she FaceTimes me. I asked Steve, are you okay if I talk or if we're watching TV? And so Steve is very present for a lot of my friendship with Jen, and he's totally fine with it. So I feel like from my perspective, we have this kind of polyamory framework where Jen and I have this platonic relationship and I have my marriage with my husband. So does this resonate for you? And do you feel like your relationships with your friends are stronger than the average friendship? And it may just be with one person. And if you have a partner or if you are polyamorous, does this fit with you? One of the books, and I should have looked to see what episode it was, but I did an episode with Jessica Fern. It's on attachment. It's early on about attachment. She's written a book called Polysecure. It's a book that I haven't read, and I did ask my coach yesterday if that would be a good book to read around attachment and around this framework of non-monogamy and platonic partnerships. And what my coach said is the book Polysecure, the author is Jessica Fern, has written one of the best books on attachment. And she talks about how we heal attachment wounds and how that shows in different relationships. So I downloaded the book from Audible. I started to listen to it last night when I went to bed. And you know what happened? I fell asleep. I have to say it's harder since I don't drive a lot of places anymore. That's really where I would listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, or when I would take a walk with the dogs. But since Steve and I walk the dogs together, I don't drive anywhere anymore. I'm finding it a lot harder to find a place. If I sit and listen to an audiobook, my mind just drifts. I have to be cleaning or doing dishes or crocheting. I guess I could do it when I crochet. There we go. She also suggested looking for areas where people are talking about non-monogamy and platonic partnerships. So does this resonate for you? And how does this framework sound? I know that if you are cis, hetero, straight, that even talking about polyamory can feel threatening and dangerous and can have connotations if this is something you haven't been exposed to. But it really resonated for me. And I'm hoping that having more clarity with Jen at some point about what our patterns of communication are, that will help. I also have to say, and I think this will resonate for you as well, that your partner's or your friend's style and yours may not be compatible. I, by nature, am a planner. I like schedules. I like dates for doing things. I like things that are very regular and predictable. That is very comforting for me. It works for my nervous system. And Jen is not. And this is just stating that we have a difference. And she's been amazing about making a time for us to record weekly. And her life is very different than mine. It has very many more moving parts. I have a partner. My kids are grown and out of the house. She's a single parent with 2 kids that have a lot of needs going on. And she has a lot of financial obligation and her own business. So, we keep talking about this because I think that it's also easy to think, well, I've got time and I want these things. And how come she can't give me what I want? Well, because her life is really different than mine. But I think we have to look at those factors. And even in, yesterday, not really hearing from her for most of the day, of recognizing that she's not feeling well and holding space for, it's hard for me when she's not feeling well. It's hard when she's not able to show up in a way that meets my needs. But this is what friendships and relationships are about, that we have space and grace for people to show up imperfectly, to have limitations, to be sick, to have other things going on. And that's true for me. I don't always show up as the best friend. And I'm confident that you could find people that would have very surprising things to tell you that are very different than how you experienced me on the podcast, because, you hear the best of what I want to share. And there's lots of other parts of me and lots of other ways that I have not shown up in ways that I'm proud of in relationships and, my own wounding and trauma. So I'm human and make lots of mistakes. As I'm sitting here reflecting about what do I want to talk about next, I think the other thing that comes up for me around permanence that I talked about with my coach is, with my son being gone in boot camp, we've had very little communication. We communicate by letter, but there was a delay for a few weeks before we received a letter from him or he could receive letters from us. We get 3 phone calls in the 10 weeks that he's gone. The second one, I think I told you, he spoke with his girlfriend. He had a shorter amount of time. He didn't manage his time well and ran out of time, so we didn't get a call. And that was the week that I had a lot of things going on. I had a blip with Jen, and then she was gone for 4 days. And then I had another blip with a friend, and then was sitting waiting for the call and didn't get it. And then the girlfriend called to say that, did he call you? And that just pushed me over the edge. But part of what happened during this time of not having as much communication and not knowing how he was doing and not knowing if he got my letters, that sense of permanence of, do I matter if I don't hear from him? Do I still exist? Am I still here? Am I being a good mother? Those are part of permanence. And if I didn't have this challenge with permanence, I would feel solid in who I am, whether I hear from him, whether I don't hear from him, whether I write to him, whether I don't write to him. And so, are there areas in your life where this sense of permanence changes for you? And if you're neurodivergent, this is part of what happens when we are neurodivergent. I mean, there's always going to be trauma to be looked at, but if you're neurodivergent, you've had trauma. There's just a research study that came out, like, I already knew this, but it just confirmed that it's just how it is. I think that's all I have, everybody. And hopefully this came together. I'm curious to know, does this resonate for you? I guess if you stayed till the end, there must have been something that sounded interesting for you. But I think that's all I have. If you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. If you want to shoot me an email, if you have any thoughts about the podcast, what you're liking, what you're not liking. I've gotten some great emails from people. I've gotten some great comments on the YouTube channel. It's just been really nice. If you listen on YouTube, I see a lot of comments about there are too many ads. At this point, I don't get paid for ads. YouTube's putting all the ads. So come to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. You can listen to the podcast there. Every other platform does not have ads. So if you want to listen to the podcast without ads, listen somewhere else. Anyways, I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to be blended. You have a right to feel sad. You have a right to feel activated. You have a right to feel joy and peace and contentment. You have a right to take up space. You're not for everybody. Everyone's not for you. You have a right to feel peaceful, content, stimmy, jumpy, loud, noisy, emotional, calm, centered, grounded. You have a right to feel lonely. You have a right to feel connected. All your parts are okay. I think that's all I have for you. Have a blessed day.